All right. Well, welcome to the week 3 live session. So tonight I'm going to be going over the Brand Yourself Presentation First Draft assignment, the 3.4 assignment. I'm going to go over that first, some do's and don'ts, some things to make sure you're doing, and some things to avoid, and just general overview. And then I'm going to go over some other important lecture content dealing with creating effective visuals, using animations, how to properly use bullet points, things to do, do's and don'ts, things like that. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions if you got questions about, excuse me, questions about stuff. So, first, the Brand Yourself Presentation First Draft. So last week, you had the 2.4 planning a presentation assignment. And this week, you're going to be using that plan to build the first draft of your Brand Yourself presentation. So in this presentation, you are basically pitching yourself to a potential employer from the industry that you're trying to get into, depending on whatever program you're in or whatnot. It is a 3 to 4 minute audiovisual presentation. We are basically talking about why you were inspired to pursue the career going after in the first place, how you are qualified to step into that professional role, and what it is that you want to do. What do you want to achieve? What are your goals for your career and for working with whoever that company may be? So I'm going to be going through and grading your presentation plans this week, so be on the lookout for my feedback on that. But I don't want you to wait until you get my feedback before you start working on your first draft, okay? We don't have a graded discussion board activity this week because we want you guys to just focus mainly on the first draft assignment. But as you get my feedback on your plans, if you need to make any adjustments or anything based on what I tell you, you'll have time to do that. So, for the first draft, so you're creating either a narrated slideshow using anything like PowerPoint or Keynote or any other slide presentation tool of your choice, as long as whatever tool you choose allows you to add or record audio, since you'll be speaking through your presentation. We need to hear you. So either narrated slideshow, or you can create a video presentation if you want. It's totally up to you, depending on what tools you have available to you, what tools you're comfortable with. As long as we have your recorded audio narration, so we need to hear you talking, and relevant visuals that go along with what it is that you're talking about. But as far as the format goes and the tools that you use, that is totally up to you, okay? So like I said, slide presentation, PowerPoint, Keynote. You can also use, there are some online tools that are free to use, such as Adobe Spark. That's a very simple online tool to use. It allows you to create narrated slideshows online, and you can, instead of having to download anything, you can just share a link to your project. But so since this is just the first draft, excuse me, how I'm going to be grading this, or what I'm going to be looking for, is just very top level stuff. Okay, I'm not going to focus super hard on the specific content. I'm just making sure that you have all the main components required to have a completed first draft. Okay, so number one, relevant visuals. All right, so it can't just be an audio file of you talking, hearing your speech. We need to have relevant images and stuff that go along and enhance what you're talking about, reflect the things that you're talking about in your speech. Your full audio narration synchronized to your visuals. So basically, whatever format of project you submit, I should be able to open it up, press play, and sit back and watch and listen to your presentation play out fully without me having to click through individual slides and click through animations and click through everything on every slide. So it should play through whether it's an actual video presentation or whether you're submitting a PowerPoint or Keynote or slide presentation. It should play through like a video where you just press play, sit back, and watch the whole thing play out in front of you. But we do need your full audio narration, okay? Just because this is a first draft, don't take that to mean that it can be sort of like half completed kind of thing. Like it needs to be a fully completed presentation, and then you'll get feedback on it from me, and you'll have time next week to make any final adjustments or redo anything that needs to be redone or anything like that for your final submission of the project. But you do need to have a completed first draft this week. Clear structure, so clear beginning, middle, end. We've talked about structure a little bit already. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that tonight. But there needs to be a clear beginning, middle, end. And then finally, the time limit. So it is a 3 to 4 minute presentation. You're aiming for no less than 3 minutes and no more than 4 minutes. This is one of the reasons why I recommended last week that you write out a script for what you're going to be talking about in your speech so that you can read through it out loud and time yourself. And that will basically show you whether you're coming up short of 3 minutes, and that'll tell you that you need to add a little bit more content or expand on some ideas. Or if you're going over 4 minutes, that'll tell you that you need to cut back on some stuff or edit or condense some ideas to get within that 3 to 4 minute time limit. Okay, so those are the 4 main things that I'm looking for with your first draft as I'm grading it. All right. So again, I'm not going to be focusing super specific on your content of what you're talking about, just making sure that you have all the main components of a first draft of your presentation. Now, again, you do need to record your audio. We need to hear you speaking through and guiding us through your presentation. Okay, we want to hear your voice. So if depending on the device that you're using, if you're using a computer and your computer doesn't have a built-in microphone, which most do nowadays, but you can always find workarounds for that. If you have a phone, almost every phone has a voice memo or voice recording app on there. You can always record your audio there and then transfer the audio file to somewhere else, to your computer or iPad or whatever, and add it into your presentation. But if you're having issues with that, let me know as soon as possible so I can try and help you find a workaround for it. But at the end of the day, you will have to record yourself talking, okay? We'll work it out. Now, some things to avoid, okay? In your speech, these kinds of things that I want you to stay away from that have come up in the past. Saying things like, you're probably asking yourself, okay, in your speech, when you're addressing the audience, whoever the audience is that you're talking to, that you've chosen, try to stay away from saying things like this, like, you're probably asking yourself, why is this person qualified for the job, or whatever, okay? The reason you want to stay away from this is because if you think about it, if you're saying you're probably asking yourself, you're making an assumption about what the audience is thinking. And if you're wrong about that, if I'm listening to you and I was your audience and you say, you're probably asking yourself, blah, 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 and that's not what I'm asking myself, or that's not what I'm thinking at all, you're immediately showing that you're not on the same page as your audience, okay? And that can be a problem. So just stay away from that entirely, saying things like that. Don't assume that you know what the audience is thinking in the moment. That can backfire on you. 2, anything along the lines of, it's great to see all of you here today, or anything that's basically don't pretend that you're live face-to-face in front of your audience, because you're not. This is a pre-recorded audiovisual presentation, so treat it like that, okay? It's really weird to play a pre-recorded audiovisual presentation and have the person saying, it's so great to see all of you here today. I'm so glad all of you could join me, when it's just you in your room in front of a camera and it's just me at my desk. And it's like, that's not the situation here. It's a pre-recorded thing, so just treat it that way, okay? You don't have to pretend that you're live in front of your audience, because you're not, okay? So just avoid doing that, just because it's super awkward and weird, and you don't need to do that. And then finally, like I said before, avoid any presentation tool that will not allow you to add or record audio. So make sure that you double check before you commit to a presentation tool. Google Slides, for example, is one that does not allow you, that doesn't let you add audio files to the slides or record audio within the program itself. So again, whatever tool you want to choose, double check, do like a test run of it first, and make sure that you are in fact able to add audio or record audio within that program. Otherwise, you're gonna shoot yourself in the foot before you even get started. And then finally, do not submit a PDF of your slides, okay? Because PDF files do not carry audio. So I'll get your slide images, but I won't get your audio at all. And that's bad, okay? So just want to throw that out there because I've had that happen a couple times. Now, if you do choose to use an online presentation tool such as Adobe Spark or Prezi or eMaze or anything like that, you do not need to download any files from those websites. Okay, all of those websites, when you finish your presentation, all of them provide you with a shareable link. Okay, a web link. So all you have to do is get a hold of that link. Make sure that if there are privacy settings on your project, that they are set to public, and then just copy and paste that link onto a Word document or a text document of some kind. And then all you have to do is submit that text document to the activity page for me to get. So all I have to do on my end is just copy and paste the link into my web browser, and it will take me to your presentation online. Okay, but you don't have to actually download presentation files and things like that to submit. All right, don't worry about doing that. I just need a link. Now, if you are unfamiliar with programs like PowerPoint or Keynote, or if you find a presentation tool such as Adobe Spark or something like that that you haven't really worked with before, you're not sure how to use it, there are resources available to you that can show you simple things like how to create new slides, how to add images, how to add audio, things like that. I sent out an announcement about this at the beginning of the month, but all of you, as part of your tuition, Full Sail have free full access to lynda.com, which is a video tutorial site that has thousands of professional tutorial videos that are conducted by professionals, and they are a fantastic resource for learning things like PowerPoint and Keynote and how to do all the little tips and tricks and cool things that they can do, but also just the very basic presentation creation functions and tools that they have. So if you run into a situation where you're like, oh, I want to add this, but I'm not sure how to do this in this program, check lynda.com. Before you come to me and say, hey, I don't know how to do this, can you show me how to do this? And then waiting for me to respond to your message, you'll get the answer a lot faster if you go to lynda.com. There are a lot of just basic beginner level tutorials for things like that again just show you the basics, and then there are intermediate and advanced stuff as well that shows you the more in-depth cool things that those programs can do. Also, I'm going to be honest, Google is your friend, okay? Don't be afraid to Google things. It's totally okay. I don't know what they tell you in high school, but it's in the real world, it's totally fine to Google things and ask Google to answer questions about how to do things. It's totally fine. And you'll get answers a lot faster that way. So don't be afraid to Google things. I encourage it, actually. But we are living in an age where the information and knowledge of the world is at your fingertips. So the I don't know how to do this or I've never done this before is not really an excuse anymore, because you have the tools available to you and the information available to find it out. You just have to put in a little bit of effort and like 5 minutes of search engine time to find the answer that you're looking for. Now, if you are going to do video presentations, which again is totally cool. It's up to you. Couple things. Number one, no vertical videos. All right. So if you're going to use your phone, for example, to record video, that's totally fine. But turn it the right way, which is horizontally. All right. This isn't Snapchat or Instagram. Hold your phone as a camera the way cameras are meant to be held. Okay. Horizontally. And there's a whole video about it in one of the. Oh, actually, I forgot to do this. My bad. So just so I know, how many of you had an opportunity to watch the list of videos that were listed on the 3.1 activity page before this evening? All right, looks like most of you did. Okay, that's good. So those of you who did should have seen the vertical video. No vertical videos. Okay. So that's number one. I don't want to see any vertical videos. Number two. So when you are done with your video presentation and you have your video file, you don't need to submit the video file to the activity page. What I would rather you do is upload the video to YouTube, all right, which is super easy to do. And then make sure you change the privacy settings on the video to either public or unlisted. The only difference between those two is public will make it available to anyone who might come across it. Unlisted only makes it available to people who you send the link to directly. Otherwise, it's hidden from anybody else finding it online. But if it's set to private, then if you send me the link, I won't be able to access it. All right, so make sure it's either public or unlisted. And then just like I said with the other online presentation tools, just copy the YouTube link onto a Word document or text document and then submit the text document. All right. Now we do have there is a discussion activity, the 3.3 peer feedback discussion, research peer feedback. It's not a weighted activity. And this discussion board is going to be open basically for the rest of the month. It's just sort of a space for you guys to, while you are building your presentations and looking for resources and things like that, to kind of collaborate a little bit and help each other out. What I would like to see is as you guys are building your presentations and looking for resources and finding things, if you come across any resource that you think might help your classmates, to post it on the discussion board. So maybe you come across I don't know, maybe you come across a great article that has some great tips about presenting or designing slides, or you come across a cool website that has a lot of good image resources, or stock footage resources, or music resources, or things like that. Share it with your class. And then as you're building, also, if you want to try to get your classmates feedback on what you're doing, you can post your projects on there and be like, hey, I'm looking for feedback. Just want to know what you think about what I got so far, things like that. But so that discussion board will be open for the rest of the month for you guys to use as sort of a little collaborative space. So any questions about the 3.4 brand yourself presentation first draft activity? Or are you good to go for now? Good to go, good to go. So far, so good. G2G. All right. Well, if you have any questions or if you run into anything like that, don't hesitate to reach out, shoot me a message, and I'll respond as soon as possible. Cool, cool. Oh, yes, Christopher, that's a good point. If you are looking for music stuff, YouTube does give you access to some royalty-free music options for your video. They also have a little like editing tool, also, don't they? Yeah. So if you don't have like a video editing software or anything like that on your computer or device, whatever, there YouTube does have one built into its functions. Awesome. Okay, so let's get into some lecture stuff. So, excuse me. So, the last couple of weeks we've been talking about how to make an impact with your content, a real impact. Some of the main things that we've gone over so far from week 1 to week 2. Obviously, number 1 is always focus on your audience. First and foremost, before you do anything, write anything, create anything, you need to know who you're talking to, right? Because the better you know who your audience is, the better you'll be able to understand how to effectively communicate to that specific audience. Okay, understanding no two audiences are the same, and not thinking of an audience as a one giant lump sum of people, but they are individuals. Okay, segmenting your audience, things like that. So audience is always number 1 when it comes to presentations, is figuring out that first. Everything else comes second. We also talked about storytelling, telling stories, the importance and the power of storytelling, and how effective storytelling is when you're trying to communicate an idea. Putting it within the context of a story helps the audience to really key into it and relate to it, so that they understand it better. So utilizing storytelling whenever you can is one of the strongest presentation tools you can have in your tool belt. And it is a skill worth developing and practicing. And then this week, we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of showing and not telling. Show, don't tell. But first, before we get into that, we're going to talk a little bit more about structure, okay? Flow of your content. So we're going to talk about a couple ideas. Well, first, so one of the videos that was in the list was the how to structure a video essay. It was actually an episode of the Every Frame of Painting YouTube series on YouTube, talking about Orson Welles and a film essay that he created, or that he made, called F for Fake, and basically the lessons that the narrator sort of took from that film essay. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you watch that was there's some good lessons in there as far as storytelling, but as it applies to what you're creating this month, and the way that you structure your speech and your beginning, middle, end structure for your presentations, are a couple things. Well, the main thing that I want you to take away from that video is the no and then idea. Okay, so you don't want to fall into an and then trap. And I'll tell you the 2 main places where and then traps tend to occur in students' work with this presentation assignment. The first is in the beginning. Okay. So in the beginning, obviously you're going to introduce yourself, right? You're going to be talking about what inspired you to pursue the career in the field that you're pursuing now, right? What sparked that desire, that passion, that fire in you that drove you to want to pursue an education and pursue a full-time career in it. But be careful, okay? Because what we don't need is sort of a play-by-play recounting of your entire life from birth up into the present, okay? Because sometimes what will happen is I'll have students who will, they'll start the presentation. Hello, my name is so-and-so. I was born in Virginia, and when I was 5, I did this and this happened. And then when I was 3, or when I was when I was 6, my parents moved to Minnesota, and I went to this school, and I learned how to do this, and then this happened, and then I did this thing, and I did this, and this happened, and then we moved here, and I did this, and I met these people, and this happened, and then and just this, and then, 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 and it just drags the whole thing down right from the start. So when you are talking about in your beginning, when you're talking about yourself or your inspirations, even if it's, directly related to the company that you're talking to, how your path and the company that you're talking to, how the two paths have either aligned or crisscrossed or intersected throughout your life, or whatever, how they've had an impact on inspiring you to pursue what you're trying to do, whatever it is, keep it to the most relevant milestones, okay, in regards to what it is that you're trying to do. So if you're a filmmaker or you're trying to be a filmmaker, when you're talking about the things that inspired you, keep it specific to major events or major things that relate directly to you wanting to be a filmmaker and why those things were important. We don't need all of the in-between rest of stuff that was going on in your life, okay? Unless it is for some reason specifically relevant to you wanting to be a filmmaker. So keep it to the most relevant milestones. Again, you only have 3 to 4 minutes, and that's not a whole lot of time. It is plenty of time to convey the information that you need to convey effectively, but it's not a lot of time if you're going to add in a whole bunch of extraneous stuff. So keep it the most relevant milestones. So that's the first place students tend to fall into and then traps. The second place is usually in the middle. When you're talking about your qualifications and how you are qualified to step into that professional role that you're trying to step into. So in the middle of your structure, you're talking about what makes you qualified, right? Your education, your experience, your knowledge, your projects that you've completed, anything that would communicate to an audience that you are credible. That you are credible and qualified, and you have what it takes to effectively step into this role. So you're also going to be talking about like your education and things that you learned in your programs at Full Sail. Okay. So again, you want to keep it to the most relevant pieces of information that are directly related to what it is you're trying to do. So what I don't want you to do is just list one by one every class that was a part of your program and what you learned in each individual class. You do not need to do that, okay? Keep it to the most relevant classes. So again, if you're trying to, if you're wanting to be a filmmaker and you're trying to specifically, you want to be a film editor specifically, right? You only need to talk about the classes where editing was a main component of that, and what you learned about editing in those classes or storytelling in those classes, anything that is directly related to film editing. Any other class that you have that is maybe not as related to what you're trying to do, you don't need to include that at all, okay? So you don't need to, I don't want to see a big list of every class that you took at Full Sail, because that's not every class is specifically relevant to what it is that you're trying to accomplish, you specifically, okay? So yeah, basically the way to avoid the and then traps is, again, keeping it to the most relevant pieces of information, the most relevant milestones, the most relevant classes, the most relevant projects that showcase your qualifications specific to what it is you're trying to do for the company that you're talking to, or the job that you're trying to step into in whatever industry you're trying to get into. Okay. So avoid the and then traps at all costs, because they will take up a lot of time, and it will suck the energy out of your presentation. Now, we're going to talk about the 3 pillars of public speaking. So anybody who's ever done any kind of like debate type activity in high school or college or anything like that, you're probably very familiar with these ideas. Excuse me. We're going to talk about the rhetorical appeals. These are basically 3 techniques used to convince or persuade people of something, or sway them to your side. So you may all be familiar with these terms. First is ethos. which is the appeal to trust or credibility. The next is pathos or pathos, however you want to pronounce that, which is the appeal to emotion. And then finally, we have logos, which is the appeal to logic. So credibility or trust, emotion, and logic. So we're going to talk about how we can utilize these three persuasive techniques in your presentation when you're trying to convince an audience that either of your basically that you're correct. You're trying to persuade them to agree with you about something, trying to persuade them to do something, or anything like that. So let's look at each of these. So first we got ethos, the appeal to trust or credibility. So when it comes to ethos, there are a couple sort of questions, relevant questions here. Things like, does the audience respect you? It is very difficult to trust somebody that you do not respect, okay? And so reputation can play a big part of this, which is why like sort of how we talked about last week with personal branding and things like that, it's important that you become more aware and take more control of your personal brand. And so that's who you are, so that you're more in control of communicating to the outside world who you are and what you're about and what you do, so that nobody else ends up doing that for you, so that you're in control of your reputation. Because it can affect you in situations like this. If you step in front of a crowd and they've heard bad things about you, then they're immediately, it's going to be difficult for them to take you seriously sometimes. Does the audience believe you're of good character? That's a little bit about sort of what I just said. If you think somebody isn't a good person, then they're not going to trust you, and they're not going to respect you, and they're not really going to give you any sort of leeway as far as listening to anything that you have to say, really. Does the audience believe you're generally trustworthy? So again, this is trust or credibility. So a lot of this also comes down to you being able to clearly communicate what it is that makes you credible, your qualifications. This is sort of that middle section of your presentation where you're talking about your qualifications, what makes you qualified, what makes you credible, what kind of knowledge, experience, understanding, research, whatever it might be, do you possess that would cause somebody to say, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about, or I can trust that what he's saying is accurate, because clearly he spent this many years pursuing formal education, or he spent this many years in the professional doing this thing professionally. Sort of he's been there, done that, been around the not his first rodeo kind of thing. Anything that convinces an audience that, okay, this is somebody that I should be listening to about whatever it is that you're talking about. Which is, does the audience believe you're an authority on the speech topic? So that's sort of ethos in a nutshell. Persuading an audience via convincing them of your credibility, and that convincing them that you are somebody that they should be listening to, or that they should believe about whatever it is that you're talking about. Now, next we have pathos, which is the appeal to emotion. So with pathos, we have things like, do your words evoke feelings of love or sympathy or fear or any emotions? Words are very, very powerful. And you need to be very careful and very deliberate about the choice of words that you use when you're talking about something, because your choice of words can have an enormous impact on how your audience responds to what it is that you're talking about, or to whether they believe or trust or even consider listening anymore to what it is that you have to say. Some words have very positive connotations. Other words have very negative connotations. It's the difference between calling somebody pro-choice or pro-abortion. Those are two very differently emotionally charged terms that generally refer to the same person with the same belief or value. So choosing one over the other is a very specific choice that you're making, because it's going to get a specific emotional reaction from response from the audience. So be careful with the words that you use, and make sure that you're not using words that are going to evoke an emotion or a feeling or a mood from your audience that you do not want to evoke. Same thing with your visuals. Okay, do your visuals evoke feelings of anything, positive or negative? Images are also very, very powerful, just in the way that words can be, but in a very different way, because images hit our brain in a way that words don't. And so you want to be very careful and very deliberate about the imagery that you show and that you use, that are reflecting the ideas that you're talking about in your speech. You also want to make sure that your images, as you're talking about things and your images are changing, making sure that the images that you do use are actually relevant to what it is that you're talking about. Otherwise, you're going to confuse your audience. If I'm talking about something that is very sort of serious and somber, and I have an image of a basket of puppies on the screen for me, you're going to confuse the audience, right? Because he's talking about something kind of serious and like not happy, but there's this basket of puppies that I'm seeing, and I don't understand what one has to do with the other. So be sure that your images match up and line up tonally with what it is that you're talking about as well. Otherwise, there's going to be sort of a cognitive dissonance for the audience between what they're hearing and what they're seeing, and you don't want that to happen. Then, does your characterization of the competition evoke feelings of any kind? So whenever you are in a situation where you're speaking on perhaps one side of an issue or a topic or a debate or something like that, be very, very careful how you address the opposite side, or the opposite end of the debate, or the opposite side of the argument, or whatever it might be. Because if you really want to convince people that your perspective or your side of the issue or the debate or whatever it is the right side, quote unquote, it's more convincing to be able to address the opposite side of things in a clear, logical manner than it is to because it shows that you've actually looked at the other side's arguments and points, and you have clear ways to address each of those points that to show either how they're inaccurate or misleading or anything like that. It's much easier to persuade somebody that you're right when you're able to sort of systematically take apart each of everything that they're throwing at you from their side, as opposed to just yelling, they're wrong, they're dumb, they're evil, they're stupid, they're whatever, and demonizing them from your side. Showing that you've actually taken a fair look at the other side and have come to the conclusion that your side is correct is much more convincing and persuasive than just shouting that the other side is wrong. So be very careful how you address the other side of the topic or the debate or whatever. And actually, there's a really great TED Talk, and I think a couple of you watched it from what I saw in the week 1 assignments. Susan Cain's The Power of Introverts TED Talk. She does a great. It's not like an issue or a debate topic necessarily, but it is one side of the introvert extrovert topic. And she does a great job of addressing the other side of the topic. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. Like I said, I know a couple of you have, but the whole TED Talk is all about introverts. That's the focus of the TED Talk, is about explaining, what it means to really actually be an introvert, how our society has sort of swayed towards everything being sort of set up for extroverts, and how basically dispelling some myths about introverts and things like that. But at some point in the middle of the talk, she stops and says, at this point, I feel like I should address the extroverts and make it clear that I'm not saying that being an extrovert is bad. Some of my best friends are extroverts and things like that. She takes a very even-handed account of the opposite side of what she's talking about, in a very fair and even-handed level way, and it's very very well done, addressing the opposite side of what she's talking about. So pathos, the appeal to emotion. This is probably the most abused of the three of these things, the most misused of these three appeals, because it's very easy to misuse, honestly, when you're trying to persuade people, getting them emotionally riled up to try to get them on your side. You see that a lot in politics. And as we talk about each of these things, I want you to really try to remember these three ideas when people are talking to you, when either commercials are talking to you, when politicians are talking to you, and try to like really analyze which of these methods are they trying to use on me right now to convince me that I should vote for them or that I should buy their product or whatever it is. Because when you can break down the communication like that it's coming at you, it's easy to spot the bull crap, kind of. But pathos specifically of these three tends to be the most misused of the three, because we are emotional beings, and it's very very easy sometimes to sway people emotionally if you can tug at their heartstrings or get them angry about something. So be very careful about how you utilize pathos. I actually have an example of that later. But first, and last thing we're going to talk about is logos. So the appeal to logic. So things like, does your message make sense? Which seems like a, well, yeah, duh, right? But you'd be surprised how many presentations I've seen that did not make sense. Their message was completely unclear or muddled, and there was no clear structure to anything, and it all just, I don't know what I just watched, or I don't know what I just listened to. So make sure that your message has a clear through line. Is your message based on facts, statistics, and evidence? This is so important. Okay. Showing that you're not just talking about something that's your opinion that you concocted in your own mind, and that's as far as you went, as far as believing that it was true, but that you actually went outside of yourself to find information and statistics and evidence and accounts from other people who can back up and verify your idea or whatever it is that you're talking about. Okay, that more so than a lot of things can help you persuade people, because if it's just your opinion and you're presenting it as fact and you have nothing else to back that up, no other studies or statistics or evidence or facts or accounts or anything like that, it's just you saying something is fact and not showing how other people also agree that this is fact and have proven that it's fact or anything like that, then it's just your opinion. And you're going to have a hard time convincing people that your opinion is correct if you have nothing else outside of yourself to back that up. So always do your research, okay? That is going to help you persuade people more so than a lot of things. And then finally, will your call to action lead to the desired outcome that you promised? So this is also sometimes where some presentations fall flat, is they have a very, their beginning and their middle are very well structured and everything's, point A to point B to point C to point D. And then at the very end, they give a call to action and they say, if we do this, then this will be the outcome. And whatever that outcome is that they're describing is a sudden jump from like point D to point Z. You're like, whoa, how did that happen? Like, how did we get from this point to that point? That doesn't make sense with everything else that you just told us. So make sure that you're not making some wild leap in logic at the very end, because you're going to lose your audience completely. So make sure that everything has a logical through line that's easy to follow from beginning all the way through your call to action in your very end. So that's logos, the appeal to logic. Now, of these three, and I'll ask you guys, which of these three do you think you respond to most? Which of these three tends to sway you? Okay, interesting. And about 70% of people voted. Maybe a couple of people who can't vote. Okay. About 70% of you responded. Oh, there we go, 80. Okay, so what I'm seeing is 13% for ethos, 13% for pathos, and 75% for logos. That's interesting. So the importance of understanding each of these three appeals and understanding how to utilize each of these three appeals is that not everybody responds the same way to each of these. Some people are more persuaded by logos than they are pathos or ethos. Some people are more swayed by pathos than they are logos or ethos. And so when you are the one trying to persuade an audience of people who respond differently to these three appeals, it's important that you're able to utilize each of these in the way that you present your idea. Now, last week, because if you can present your idea in a way that shows the ethos of it, shows the pathos of it, and shows the logos of it, then you're hitting everybody across the board. And you should be able to persuade the majority of people if you're able to effectively utilize each of these three rhetorical techniques. Last week we talked about the golden circle idea, from the Simon Sinek video, How Great Leaders Inspire Action, the why, how, what structure, right? Now, one of the reasons why that structure is so effective has specifically to do with these three appeals, because they very coincidentally line up perfectly to the golden circle why, how, what structure. Starting with why, right? That why, that's the pathos. That's the emotional part, right? That's you talking to that center part of the brain that controls emotions and controls decision making. So, for example, when you're talking about structure of the beginning, middle, end structure of your assignment, starting off with why you were inspired to pursue this in the first place, the emotional side of this. Why am I in this to win this? Why is this my passion? Why am I driven towards this at all? That's the pathos of your presentation, of your story. Your middle is the ethos, which is credibility, which is the how, which is how you are qualified to step into the role that you're trying to get into in the industry that you want to be a part of, right? So that's where you're talking about your education and your experience, your knowledge, or all the more like resume-ish type information. That's all in the middle. That's all ethos. That's all credibility. And then finally, the logos is the logical part of this. Given your inspiration and your qualifications, what is the logical step you're going to make that you want to accomplish? That is your end. That is the what. That is the what do you want to do? What are your goals? What do you want to achieve? What do you want to create? Given the passion and drive that you have, and the education and knowledge and understanding that you've sought out because of that passion, what is it that you're looking to do with those things? That is the progression, the narrative progression of your presentation. That beginning, middle, end, why, how, what, pathos, ethos, logos. That's why the golden circle structure is so effective, because it utilizes each of those three rhetorical appeals so that you can hit everybody in the audience no matter what they respond to most. Does that make sense? Okay, just checking it, just making sure I'm making sense. Okay, cool. So that's a little bit of structure. Now, now we're going to talk about something called amplifying the signal, cutting through the noise. So anybody who is going into the audio fields, whether recording arts or engineering or anything like that, if you are not aware of this concept already, this will be a very important thing that you learn. There's a concept called signal flow. So basically, for example, if I were recording a song and I was in the vocal booth, recording me singing the lyrics, the signal flow is something that is basically it's the path that its signal takes from its origination point to its final wherever it ends up. So if I was in a recording booth singing and recording me singing, the signal flow would be the signal would start in my throat, where my vocal cords create the sound of my voice and the singing voice, and that comes out of my mouth through the air into the microphone, through the microphone line, into whatever other equipment in the recording studio there is, and then it ends up in its final recording state, whether it's digital or recording on tape or whatever the final recording format might be. So if at the final destination, if there is a problem with the audio, if there's like a buzz or distortion or something like that, then that might mean there is a problem somewhere within the signal flow. Maybe there's a loose connection somewhere, a loose wire, or something like that. And the way that you troubleshoot that is tracing it backwards from its final destination back through each of the equipment that it goes through in the recording studio, back through the microphone line, back through the microphone, and even back through, the environment of the booth and back into my mouth and throat, where it started from. And it's usually somewhere along the line, that's where you can find where the problem is and you can fix it. But you have to know the signal flow. And so when it comes to presentations, there is a very similar flow of signal, with your idea being the thing that's traveling. So your idea starts with you in your head, right? But then you got to put it into words, and those words have to come out of your mouth through an environment of some kind into the ears of an audience member, whether it's just one person or whether it's a room full of people. It has to go into their ears and into their brains in a way that they're able to understand it and assess it and either accept it or deny it. And they're much in the same way that there can be distortion or problems or things along the way of that signal flow that can sort of get in the way and cause distortion or noise, so it's not recepted by the audience in the way that you intended it to from your point. There can be some problems. So we're going to talk about some noise to avoid so that your message comes through loud and clear. So the first is credibility noise. So when I'm talking about credibility noise, this has to do with basically the speaker's believability, or when the speaker's believability or their likability can create interference for the audience and cause problems. So, for example, negative first impression. For example, if you're talking to a group of people in an audience, you walk out and you make a bad first impression, you're immediately throwing up a wall in between you and your audience. And that can be a hard wall to get over and to get them back on your side. But negative first impressions can cause a problem as far as how the audience likes you, your likability as somebody who's talking to an audience. So again, you always want to avoid negative first impressions as much as possible as you can. But that can hurt your credibility. No common ground, not establishing how you, what it is that you have in common with the audience and why you're somebody that they should be listening to. So we talked about that during week 1, as far as how to find that, how to relate to your audience. Things like common goals, similar experiences, things like that. Things that show that you get where they're coming from, and that you understand what they need, and that what you have to offer them, to share with them, whatever your idea is going to help them because you get them, sort of. So you got to figure out what that common ground is and be able to establish that common ground fairly early in your presentation. Because otherwise, you're going to feel like this guy doesn't know me, doesn't get me. And then an imbalance in emotional appeal. So again, I told you pathos is oftentimes the most misused and sometimes abused of the 3 rhetorical appeal techniques. So in the list of videos that I provided for you this week, I included the Sarah McLachlan In the Arms of the Angel ASPC commercial, which is the most perfect example of an imbalance in emotional appeal that I could possibly find, and that will probably ever exist. Because that people will dive for the remote to change the channel as soon as they hear the first couple notes of that song, of that commercial play. Because if you've seen it all, if you've seen the whole thing once, you never want to see it again. When I'm teaching this class on campus for my students live, I make them watch the entire commercial in class. And I have had students get up and leave the class because they're like, I can't do this. But that is a very, very emotionally manipulative commercial, and it's unfortunate because it is a very important message. Like, at the end of the day, they are communicating a very important idea, a very important message, but it's so emotionally heavy-handed that nobody wants to watch it, and it defeats the entire purpose of having a commercial at all. So you want to be very careful in how you present your idea, that you're not being too emotionally heavy-handed, because it's one thing to tug on the heartstrings of an audience to sort of get them feeling something for you, but you don't want to yank on them, okay? Because it's when the audience starts to feel like you're trying to manipulate them emotionally that they will shut you out, because audiences do not like to feel like they are being manipulated emotionally. And so there's a very delicate balance there between tugging on a heartstring and full on yanking it out. So be careful with that, because that can hurt your credibility. Because again, it comes down to, okay, this person is trying to get me to cry. Like, that's not cool. Like, I see what you're doing. And it can hurt your credibility. And finally, credibility not established. So if you in no way convey to an audience what your credibility is, or what your qualifications are, or why they are somebody, or why you are somebody that they should be talking to, or they should be listening to, or should believe in whatever it is that you have to share with them, then it's going to be hard for them to trust you, that you are somebody who is an authority on what you're talking about. So you don't want to ever skip that ethos part, okay? Because establishing your credibility is a key component to getting the audience to trust that you know what you're talking about. So that's some credibility noise. Next, we have semantic noise. So when I'm talking about semantic noise, that basically means when either the language that's being used, or even the interpretation of that language, can create interference for the audience and cause them to maybe not fully understand what you're talking about. Excuse me. So with semantic noise, things like using too much jargon. So again, this is the importance of understanding who your audience is and who you're talking to. Okay, because if you're talking to a room full of people who are from your industry, right, who maybe do the same job that you do, and so they know the equipment and the technical language and the industry slang and jargon, whatever, then sure, go ahead, use the jargon, use the slang terms, because your audience, that specific audience, will probably understand it and they'll be able to follow along. But if you're talking to an audience who is not a part of your industry, and you start throwing out all these technical terms and technical jargon and industry slang and lingo that they've never heard in their life, they're going to have no idea what you're talking about, and they'll have no chance of following what you're presenting to them. So be very, very careful about your use of jargon. And that is one of the reasons why I included that other video about the jargon overload video, the guy talking about the retro encabulator, which is not a real thing. That whole thing is just a sort of a spoof. Like, this is what it sounds, this is what it feels like to listen to somebody using all these technical terms and having no idea what they mean. That's what an audience feels like when you do that as a presenter. Although I got to give it to that actor, though. Like, he really sells it. Like, he knows what he's talking about. But be careful of your use of jargon, okay? It's very, very, very dependent on who your audience is and who you're talking to, okay? Which is the importance of knowing who your audience is. So next is too many filter words. The ums and the ahs and the like. I'm sure many of you are guilty of this. I myself am guilty of this sometimes. And I'm actually going to probably catch myself every time I do it until the end of this presentation. And it's going to bug the crap out of me. But here's the thing. The ums and the ahs and the likes, okay, they're not inherently bad, all right? They're actually very natural. They're conversational is what they are. We all use them. When we're talking conversationally in our everyday lives, we all use ums and ahs and likes. The only time it becomes a problem, when it becomes an issue when you're presenting, is when you're doing it so much, when there's too many filter words, when you're saying like every 3 words, and the audience starts to key in on it. When that's what they start paying attention to more so than what you're actually talking about, when the ums and the ahs and the likes become so prevalent that that's all they can hear is when you say ah, or like, that's when it becomes an issue, okay? So don't be afraid to say ah, or like every now and then while you're talking, because like I said, it's conversational. Just make sure that it's not happening so often that that's the only thing your audience can hear. Now, if you are somebody who struggles with this, something that you can do to sort of help remedy this a little bit is, well, here's the thing. Most people who do struggle with this aren't aware of it. Usually they're not aware of how often they're saying ah, or like. Because usually when it gets to that level where it's too many, you're saying those things too often, usually it's a nerves issue, or you're unprepared. And so you're struggling with what you want to say next. So number one, prepare as much as possible, and that'll immediately reduce the amount of uncertainty that you have in what you're talking about, and you won't feel the need to fill in between pauses with or like. But the number 2 thing that you can do is when you're rehearsing, which all of you should be doing before you present something, and before you record your presentation, before you record your narration, practice this out loud, okay? But also do it in front of somebody that you feel comfortable doing it in front of, somebody that you trust, that you're not going to feel embarrassed practicing in front of. But while you're practicing in front of them, just tell them, as they're listening to you, anytime they hear you say or like, they just quietly raise their hand and then put it back down, just so it's in your eyesight, so you see it, so that you become more aware of how often you're doing it. Because once you become more aware of how often you're saying or like, then you'll get to a point where you'll be able to feel when you're about to say or like. And then once you get to that point, you can practice just when you get that feeling like I'm about to say or I'm about to say or I'm about to say like. When you get that feeling, before you do, all you have to practice doing is just stopping silently, collecting your thoughts in your head, and then once you know the next thing you want to say that's not or like, then you continue out loud. It's okay to pause momentarily. You do not need to be making noise out of your mouth every single every single second that you're speaking, that you're in front of an audience or anything like that. A moment of silence to collect your thoughts is totally fine. Okay. But practicing that specifically will help with the ums, ahs, or likes. Because, like I said, most people aren't aware of how often they're doing it. And then once you become more aware of how often you're doing it, you'll start to recognize when you're about to. And that's when you can practice stopping and not saying it, collecting your thoughts, and then continuing. This is often a lot of times why some presenters have like a bottle of water or a drink on stage or something, not just to keep their throats moist while they're talking so they don't go hoarse and their throats don't get dry, but also if they forget the next thing that they're going to say or they're going to talk about, they stop, take a drink of water, and as they're drinking, they think of the next thing they want to say, and they put the bottle down or the glass down, and they continue on, and you would never know. As a little pro tip there. So, but the too many filter words, that can cause a problem for the audience when that's all they start to hear, when it's so often that the audience starts to notice that you're saying it so much. That's when it becomes a problem. And then when your visual language is distracting. So when your visuals cause a problem. So again, either that cognitive dissonance example that I gave earlier, where you're talking about something super serious and maybe kind of sad, and you have some like oddly positive, happy basket full of puppies image that the audience is seeing. That can be distracting and confusing for an audience. But also when it comes to if you utilize animations in your slides, misusing animations, and we're going to talk about that tonight, can be an enormous distraction for the audience. When you just like overload your slides with animations where everything is animated and like flashing and bouncing and swooshing around and things like that, that's incredibly distracting for the audience. And 9.9 out of 10 times serve no purpose whatsoever and should not be in your presentation. But again, we're going to get to that in a little bit. But again, be careful. And again, so like I said, be very careful and very deliberate about the images and the imagery that you utilize to reflect the ideas that you're talking about in your speech, and make sure they align with what you're talking about. Okay. So what you're talking about makes sense with what we're seeing. And then finally, we have experiential noise. So with experiential noise, these are things that when either the speaker's delivery or even the venue itself, the environment that the presentation is taking place in, can cause interference for the audience. So with experiential noise, things like presentation is too long. So this is an interesting one because it's not always a literal thing. It's not always that the presentation is literally too long, but it's when the audience starts to feel like this presentation is going on too long. That's when it becomes a problem, because I have watched and listened to presentations that were an hour long and they felt like it was only 10 minutes. And I have also listened to presentations that were 4 minutes long and felt like they were an hour long. It's all relative. But it's when the audience starts to feel like, okay, this is dragging on, or okay, we've talked about this already, or okay, he's saying the same thing over and over again, or you have all these and then traps where it's just and then, and it just sucks the energy out and just drags the pace down, and the audience feels like, okay, when is this going to end? That's what the presentation is too long idea is kind of. So again, that's why you want to make sure that you're only including the most relevant piece of information, that you keep the pace going at a good rate so it's not too slow, keeping things interesting, keeping things interactive. These all help the audience feel engaged, because when the audience is engaged in what you're talking about, they're not paying attention to the time at all. Then we have distracting body language. Excuse me. So again, in situations where you are presenting live or where the audience can see you as you're speaking or as you're presenting, whether it's live or whether if it's even on video, for example, be aware of what your body is doing. And oftentimes it is a sort of a nerves kind of thing, more often than not. Some people have little nervous tics that they do. And usually it's because you have all this nervous energy inside of you because you're nervous about this presentation and you're so focused on what you're saying that you're not paying attention to what your body is doing. And so you have all this nervous energy pent up in you, and your body finds way to get that nervous energy out, usually a lot of times without you even realizing what you're doing, because it's sort of just subconsciously trying to deal with this nervous energy that you have. One of the most often things that I see distracting body language wise from a lot of times from students doing presentations live in class and things like that is a sort of side to side, back and forth, stationary square dance they do as they're talking. And I had a student a couple months ago who at the end, when he gave his final presentation live for the class, because we were on campus, we do a little feedback session afterwards. And one of the other students pointed out that he was doing this little stationary square dance thing throughout his whole presentation. And the student was like, I didn't even know that I was doing that. Like, I was so nervous up here about doing this. Like, I didn't even know I was doing that at all. And we were all like, oh yeah, you were doing this weird, like back and forth and side to side, like you were swaying back and forth and like you're shuffling your feet sort of just within like a 2 square foot like radius kind of thing. And he was like, oh my God, I didn't even know I was doing that. Some people, when it comes to like, it has to do with their hair. Like a lot of women, if you have like hair, like long hair, brushing hair back behind your ear every like 3 seconds, or if you have bangs, like flicking your head to the side to get hair out of your eyes every 3 seconds, like that's a nervous tick kind of thing that you do over and over again, and the audience starts to key in on it. And so that's when it becomes a problem, is when it's distracting the audience from listening to what you're saying. So again, when you're practicing, when you're rehearsing, just like with the like thing, if you're doing it in front of somebody, have that be sort of a secondary thing that they look out for, is look for any weird body things that I'm doing with my hands or my feet or anything like that. That's sort of a distracting, nervous tick kind of thing, just so that you're aware of it, that you're doing it, so that you can be conscious of that when you do present, and try to actively not do that, and be more conscious of yourself and your body. Also with experiential noise, when it's clear beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are either unprepared or unrehearsed for this presentation, when it is painfully obvious that it is the very first time you are giving this presentation and even saying these words out loud, that can be very distracting for the audience. When you seem so unprepared and you're just, it's hard to listen to. It's hard to, it's hard to experience as an audience, a presenter who is so painfully unprepared or has not rehearsed at all, that they're just sort of seem very scattered and unsure of what they're going to say next, and just it's going to hurt your presentation in a huge way if you seem super unprepared or unrehearsed, which is why preparing as much as you can and rehearsing and practicing out loud is so important. Okay, especially when it comes to things like excuse me, if you are somebody who goes maybe off of a script, a lot of times there are things that we write down in text that sound good in our head and sound like they flow, but then when we speak those words out loud or that sentence or whatever, there's just something about the order of the words that trips you up every time. And it seems ridiculous, but it's true. It's a real thing. And so practicing it out loud, going through your speech out loud, will help you find those areas where like it's a certain word combination or consonant combination or whatever it might be, just trips your tongue every time you try to say it. And it sounds perfectly fine in your head, but then once you actually say it out loud, that's when you don't find out until you actually try to say it out loud that it's weirdly difficult to say that sentence or whatever. So practice out loud is going to help you so much. And then finally, poor environment. Now, sometimes this is something that's completely out of your control. Okay, and it's unfortunate. But sometimes, I have oftentimes there have been a handful of times actually where it'll be. I've had a couple instances at Full Sail on campus where it's the middle of like July or August, Florida heat, summertime, and I'm in a classroom with like 90 students, and the AC stops working. And being in a classroom with 90 people in a closed room with no air conditioning, it gets super hot and super uncomfortable super fast. And that's super distracting when you're trying to teach, and super distracting when you're trying to listen and pay attention and learn. On the opposite end of that, I have also been teaching classrooms where we have, computer equipment and stuff, and so they keep those rooms like super power AC'd, and it is freezing in those rooms, and that is equally distracting. When you can't hear yourself think over the sound of people's teeth chattering because they're all so cold. I've had to do classes sometimes with construction going on, like right outside the window, like jackhammering construction. There's nothing I can do about it. I can't go tell them to stop working. I just have to roll the punch and do the best I can. But as a presenter, if you find yourself in a situation where there is clearly an issue that everybody in the room is dealing with, whether it's temperature or something, a weird noise or something that is distracting to everybody, kind of, one of the best things that you can do is just address it straight out, just from the get-go. Like, man, it is freezing in here. Because it does one of two things. Or does a couple things. It sort of cuts the tension a little bit, but it makes the audience aware that you are aware of what they're struggling with, or what they're dealing with, and it immediately creates that common ground, because it's not a you guys are dealing with this, it's a we are dealing with this issue together. And so it immediately creates that connection with the audience, which is like, it's a little way to turn a frown upside down, kind of. It may be a struggle, whatever the issue is. It might be a struggle, and from that point forward. But at least addressing that issue straight off the bat to the audience, so that they're aware that you are aware, and knowing that you're also dealing with this. Like I said, it creates that common ground right off the bat, and it cuts the tension a little bit. Maybe get the audience to laugh, a little maybe, which is always a good thing. So that can also be an experiential noise that can cause problems for the audience. And like I said, sometimes it's completely out of your control and you can't do anything about it, which sucks. It just does sometimes. But sometimes, like I said, the best way to address, or one of the best ways to deal with it, is just addressing it to the audience. It can actually go a long way to helping your presentation. Okay. Oh, hold on a second. Oh, sorry. 1 second. Okay. So since this week you are building the first draft of your audio-visual presentation, I'm going to focus on effectively creating visuals for your presentation, things to think about, things to keep in mind, things to avoid as well. So first we're going to talk about visual vertigo and how to avoid visual vertigo. So visual vertigo is basically anything in your images, in your visuals, that that are distracting to the audience, whether it's a combination of colors, or weird things that sort of trip the audience out or makes their eyeballs want to explode out of their head kind of thing. And even when it comes to animations as well. Anything in your visuals that distracts the audience away from paying attention to what you're saying, which is the most important part, and paying more attention to what's happening in your visuals. Want to avoid that at all costs. So we're going to talk about preventing visual vertigo. But specifically, we're going to talk about animations because you guys love animating things in PowerPoint and Keynote and things like that. And like I said, 9.9 times out of 10, the animation you're using is completely unnecessary. And it's going to end up being more of a distraction for the audience than it is going to be something that actually helps the audience understand what you're talking about or helps the visual flow of your presentation. So we're going to talk about 7 reasons you're using animation wrong. Reason number 7. Too many animations confuse the purpose. Why did that happen? So don't over animate your items in your slide, whether it's text or an image or a shape or whatever it might be. Don't over animate stuff, okay? If you're going to animate something, just animate it once, okay? It doesn't need to do a billion different flips and tricks and fades and flashes and all that stuff, because all it's going to do is distract your audience. It's not going to help you out at all. Reason number 6. Actually, there's a little sub-reason here. A lot of times people who have animations like this have to wait for the animation to play out, which takes up time, which is not good. But reason number 6, the animation is unnatural or counterintuitive. So this example, for example, here in the Western world, we read things from left to right. And so when we see a sentence like this revealed from right to left, backwards, it sort of itches our brains a bit. And it bugs us just a little bit, and it can be very distracting. So be careful with animations like that. Reason number 5, the pace is frenetic, annoying, or chaotic. So much like hyperactive children, hyperactive slides can be very annoying and distracting. And so again, you don't want to distract the audience from what you're talking about by trying to have flashy, cool stuff happen in your slides and your visuals, all right? And reason number 4. The animation style is inappropriate for the content. So if I was giving a presentation about forest fires, it would probably be inappropriate for all of my text to burst into flames on my slides. So be careful with things like that. And reason number 3, a sudden animation can startle or confuse the audience. So again, you don't want to do either of those things unless you're doing it for a very specific purpose, to make a point of some kind. But other than that, you don't want any of your animations to confuse or startle your audience. Reason number 2. Now, a lot of times I could say anything I want right now. Most of you wouldn't hear me because you're paying attention to the swirling text on the screen. But any animation or movement distracts the audience from the presenter themselves. And I've actually done that in class on campus before with that. I hit the animation for number 2 and words start swirling, and I said something ridiculous. And then when it was done, I was like, how many of you heard what I just said? And only like the 2 or 3 people who were sitting directly in front of me raised their hands, because everybody else was paying attention to the swirling text on the slide. And the number 1 reason you're using animation wrong is the animation feature is used just because. So here's the thing when it comes to animation. If you do not have a specific reason for using it, a specific purpose that you can articulate, that is not, I thought it looked cool. If you don't have a specific reason for why you think it's going to help your presentation, then don't use it. Because like I said, 9.9 times out of 10, animations that I see in student presentations serve no purpose other than I thought it looked cool, or just because. If you think adding animations to your presentation is going to improve the presentation, if you're like unsure about the quality of a presentation and you think adding animations is going to like spice it up, don't go down that route. That is not an issue that animation is going to fix. That's a content issue. Okay. Now I will show you some examples of effective use of animations that can actually help you control the audience's attention, help the flow of your content from idea to idea that are actually useful. Now, bullet points, for example. If you decide to have a slide with bullet points like this, and anytime you have multiple bullet points on a single slide, a lot of the times, and most of the time, people will show all the bullet points all at once, just like this. I have 4 points I want to talk about. These are the 4 points. I'm going to talk about point number 1 first. And then you talk about point number 1. But the audience has already read all 4 points, so they already have an idea where you're going. So they're already kind of inclined to tune out a little bit because they see where you're going with this. So if you want to control the audience's attention, instead of showing all 4 or all of your bullet points all at once so the audience can see sort of the roadmap of where you're going, just show 1 point at a time. I'm talk about my first point, and that keeps the audience focused on that point only. And when you're done with point number 1, you're going to move on to point number 2, and hey, a little fade in point number 2. It doesn't need to explode in, it doesn't need to flash in, it doesn't need to swing in. It's just a simple fade in is one of the most effective animations you can use. It's simple, yes. It's not like, ooh, wow, look at that kind of animation, but oftentimes the ooh, wow animations are the ones that are distracting the audience from what you're actually talking about. And they're actually working against you, not helping you. So just showing each point by point controls the audience's attention and keeps them focused on where you want them to be focused on in that moment. And then when you're ready to move on, you move on to the next one. And now they're just focused on that one. And then they can see from point 1 to point 3 where the roadmap is going and how those points connect point to point until you're done with point 4. Okay? Now, in week 1, we were talking about story essentials. Ask you guys in the video what are some basic elements of any story, right? And I get a lot of different answers a lot of times. But I'm looking for, as the presenter, I'm looking for one answer specifically. And I know that. And so animation-wise, I use animation to sort of enhance this idea where I'm asking students to give me examples of different types of story elements that tend to be in every story. And I get all of these usually, the hero character, a villain, a love interest, conflict, sidekick, climax, beginning, themes, locations, morals, tension, all these kind of things, right? So it's a sort of shotgun of ideas and concepts, right? But there are only 3 of these. Well, there's 3 specific words here that I want the audience to focus on, and they're the specific things that I'm going to talk about next. And so I'm just throwing it out there to see if any student comes up with those answers that I'm actually looking for as the presenter, because I know the next point that I'm going to move on to. So just having those revealed like that, that's effective use of animation. But this more specifically, as far as the flow of your content from one slide to the next and one point to the next, this is also what I'm about to do, another use of animation that is actually effective in helping the flow of your visuals. So out of all of these, I only wanted to talk about beginning, middle, and end. And those 3 words are up here in different areas. Down at the bottom, up here over on the left side, and over up here in the right corner. So when I do this, I specifically want to talk about the beginning, middle, and end. That is narrowing the focus of what we were talking about from any and all story elements that are in any story to these specific three things. And having those words come together from all sides of the slide into the middle like this is using animation to help the visual flow of my content and my point from point to point. That is effective use of animation. It's not super flashy. It's not crazy. It's not anything that's distracting. It's literally flowing from one point to the next. So that is what I mean by effective use of animation. Does that make sense? As opposed to having things burst into flames. Okay. Now, also when it comes to bullet points. So when I'm talking about bullet points, a lot of times when you have a slide with bullet points, you show the bullet points, you'll start sort of introducing the idea that you're going to talk about. And when you have things like this, I'm willing to bet that by now, most of you have already probably read through all the text that's on the slide right now. And that's the problem with doing this. Because if I take the time to introduce what I'm going to talk about and I'm showing everything like this, and then I just go into saying in my speech, any text you put on the screen, your audience will try to read immediately. You want your audience to listen to your speech, and they can't do both at the same time. Don't ever write your script out on your slides and read it word for word like I'm doing now. You'll bore your audience to death. This is like a cardinal rule of presentations. Do not ever, 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 ever write your script out and just read it word for word off your slides. Ever. Cardinal rule of presenting, okay, and presentations. This is like the worst crime you can commit to an audience. Because number one, it shows that you're completely unprepared. Because it shows that you are completely unnecessary in this transaction. If you're just going to put all your text if you're going to put the text of your entire speech on your slide, then why am I wasting my time sitting here listening to you read it to me like a child, word for word off of the screen? Like, just send me the PDF of your slides. I'll read it myself, and I'll get the exact same amount of information out of it than I would listening to you read it to me word for word. Do not ever, 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 ever do this. Okay. I cannot stress that enough. This is a cardinal rule. Don't ever do this. But this is also a problem is having so much text putting a lot of text on your slide as far as it goes bullet points, because like I said, the audience, any text you put on the slide, the audience will immediately start reading it before you even address it, get to the chance to address it yourself. The audience will read through it always as soon as it pops up. And that's a problem. Okay, because once the audience has read it, they know it. And then once you start to address it, they start to tune out because they've already read it. They know what you're going to say. They know what you're going to talk about already because they already took 5 seconds to read everything that was on your slide. So again, it becomes an issue of controlling the audience's attention and keeping the audience's attention where you want it. So when it does come to bullet points, if you are going to use them, which you don't have to, but if you're going to, minimal text, keywords, okay? And then elaborate on those keywords in your speech and what you're saying. And then, like we talked about before, revealing one bullet point at a time to control the audience's attention on the topic or the specific point that you want them to focus on at that time. But you don't even need to do this. So what's even more effective than minimal text bullet points and elaborating on the keywords like this? It would be much more visually engaging to use images that say basically the same thing. Reduce text, use relevant images, one idea per slide. Those 3 images right there were infinitely more engaging and interesting to look at than just black text on a white slide in bullet point form. Those 3 images will keep your audience engaged and paying attention. Bullet points tend to do that much less effectively. Which brings me to my next point when it comes to visuals and image. Color. Color matters. And the color choices that you use, you want to make sure, again, that you're doing it mindfully and deliberately, okay? Because colors mean things. Colors evoke feelings and moods and ideas and emotions. And you want to make sure that the color choices that you use look good together, that they don't want to make your audience's eyeballs explode out of your head, like having like hot pink text on an electric green background. Like, it just hurts people's faces to look at. The colors that work well together and colors that also work well with what you're talking about. So it can be the difference between a sunset or an igloo, be the difference between an iceberg and a shark, be the difference between the moon and the Death Star. Color matters. So you want to be very careful with the colors that you use and how much of those colors that you use. Red, for example. What are some basic ideas or emotions or moods that we associate with the color red? Intensity. Red is connotation of anger. Yeah. Hot. Yeah. Temperature. Anger, rage, danger. Danger, right? Stop signs, red lights. Yeah. Now think on the opposite side of anger and rage. What else do we associate the color red with? On the lighter side of things. Love. Yeah. Hearts, roses, passion. There you go. See, so red can be a sort of a difficult color to work with. It's also a very dominant color. It's a very aggressive color. And so you don't want to use too much of it because it can be a very overpowering color. Um, and then when you combine that color with other colors, like if you use red and black together, that gives off a very sort of masculine feel to it. Um, and so again, so yeah, all those were great examples of red, right? Love, passion, anger, danger, uh, rage, in even temperature, red hot. Um, there are a lot of things we associate with that color, and every color has examples like that we associate with. Blue, depending on the shade and tint of blue, it's a very cool color. We associate with water, with the sky. We also associate with cold. We associate with sadness as well, feeling blue, things like that. So if you're designing slides and you're choosing like background colors or color for text or anything like that, be very conscious and deliberate about the colors that you use, because those colors can evoke an emotion or a mood or an idea or a feeling in your audience that you may not intend, or it could be something that works against what you're talking about in a way that you maybe didn't expect. Um, so just like with words and images, be conscious and deliberate about the colors that you use and make sure that you're using colors that work for you and not against you. Fonts matter. So anytime you do have text in your visuals, make sure that it's easy to see and easy to read. Okay? From the back of the audience, it should be easy to read and understand. So avoid very scripty, cursive, swirly text, because that can be difficult to read in an audience. I mean, even if it's just me looking at my computer, with it on my screen, it can be difficult for me to read close up to my screen. So utilize text and fonts that are clear and easily understood and easy to read. And if you try to use like some of the more weird, creative kinds of fonts and stuff, again, just like this example, make sure it makes sense with what the actual text is saying. You don't want to send the wrong message unintentionally with your font choice. Which brings us to pictures. So we've all heard the phrase, picture's worth 1,000 words. So that means that you don't need to include a picture and 1,000 words on your slide. So one of the other videos that I included in the list was a TED Talk from a fellow named Chip Kidd called Designing Books is No Laughing Matter. Okay, it is. So for those of you who haven't watched this yet, again, I highly recommend it. But basically, this is the guy who his job is to design book covers. And in the talk, he talks about sort of the process and the idea of conveying the idea or the concept of a book through the image of the cover of the book in a way that communicates a little bit what the story or the characters might be about, but in an interesting way that grabs a potential reader's attention. You know, you go into Barnes and Noble or a library or whatever, there are thousands of books on the shelves, and you have to find a way to sort of trying to design a cover that's going to stand out from the crowd in a way that's interesting and engaging, to make somebody pick up the book and see, oh, I wonder what this is about, just based off the cover alone. But also within his talk, he gives a little bit of his background and talks about his education a little bit, and gives an example of a very, very, very important lesson that he learned early on in his visual design education. And I'm going to share that with you and reiterate that with those of you who have watched it already. And it's a very simple idea, and it goes like this. You can show an audience a picture of an apple, and they will understand apple. You can show an audience the word apple, and they will understand apple. But do not ever show an audience a picture of an apple with the word apple. That is treating the audience like they are idiots. And that is never something that you want to do, okay? So this goes towards something, an idea called visual redundancies. And you want to eliminate as many visual redundancies as you can in your images and your visuals, okay? So, actually, hold on a second. Okay, no. So you want to avoid visual redundancies. You don't need to crowd and cram information and text and images and stuff all into a single slide, okay? Don't overcrowd your slides. It will not bring clarity to anything. You're just going to confuse and overwhelm your audience. And actually, as a perfect example of this, back in 2010, I believe, New York Times awarded this, what you're seeing here, as the worst PowerPoint slide ever created. Supposedly, this slide is supposed to explain U.S. counterinsurgency strategies in Afghanistan all on one slide. Look at the waste here. How utterly useless this slide is. I have tried multiple times to try to work this out and try to figure out what means what and what connects to what and where things go, and you can't. It's absolutely worthless. And actually, supposedly, General David Petraeus was furious when he saw this slide because it is utterly worthless. It is you can't derive any useful information from this whatsoever. But just looking at this and thinking, just think how much time how much effort went into creating this thing that is utterly useless because it's so much information all on one slide, and it is completely pointless. What a waste of time and effort this slide is. And by the way, down here in the corner, working draft version 3. I can't even imagine what the other working drafts look like. But man, so don't feel like you have to like fill the entire slide with text and images and shapes and pictures and things like that. That is not going to help you out, okay? So we'll do a little test run, okay? We're going to use this slide as an example, okay? If I'm trying to communicate a single idea, right, I'm going to give you one line of a speech, and that line, in conjunction with this slide, is supposed to convey one idea. We're going to talk about how effectively that works, all right? So this is the speech. Ready? Idea I'm trying to convey. If I showed you the slide, if you're all sitting in an audience in a room, and I was up here and there was a screen, and I showed this slide on the screen, and I said, as my speech, I have a lazy cat. End scene. That's it. That's my speech. That's the idea I want to convey. Does this slide visually effectively communicate that idea? That I have a lazy cat? Or is there something I could do to make this better? Or to simplify the visual? Anybody? Jay says just show one picture of my cat laying down. All right, so I got a lot of pictures up here. I got 6 different pictures that are all communicating basically the exact same idea, right? Do I need 6 pictures all communicating the exact same idea? No, probably not, right? That's a redundancy that I can cut out. Is there anything else you can think of just from this one? Oh, it just says don't have the text if that's what you're going to say. I told you in my speech I have a lazy cat. So do I need to have it written out on the slide that I have a lazy cat? No, probably not. And even there, even if I were to leave it, what is the problem with that text as it sits right now? Color is bad, right? You can see I have a, but the word lazy is in black text, and I've laid it on top of a dark colored area of the image behind it, so the A and Z kind of disappears and blends in with the image behind it, and you kind of lose the word lazy. So you can't even see the entire text, right? So be careful, be very, very careful when you're doing that. If you do that, if you put text on top of an image, make sure that we can see every letter of that text clearly and that nothing is blending in and disappearing into the color behind it, okay? Because if we can't read the text that's on the slide, then it shouldn't be there at all in the first place. All right, let's simplify this a little bit. Well, cut out half the images. We'll restructure it a little bit so it doesn't look like I just vomited 6 pictures onto a slide and left it there. Now the text is still there, but again, do I need it, or is there something else I could do to make this, to simplify this even further? Yeah, I really don't need the text. Again, I told you in my speech, I have a lazy cat. So there's no point in having that text in there at all, really. You heard me say it. The cat's name is Cue Ball. Yeah, he's white and got some ginger on there. He's got some ginger stripes on his tail. Is there anything else aside from getting rid of the text? Right. I still have three pictures, all communicating visually the exact same idea, right? And actually, the one on the uh, over here on the left that has a terrible picture of myself in it. That's more showing that I am lazy, not even really that my cat is lazy. So if the point of my speech is the focus of my speech is the laziness of my cat, then I probably shouldn't have a picture of me in there because that pulls the focus to me instead of my cat. So I would say let's pick the most visually interesting or relevant of these three that communicates that idea, and we'll get rid of the text. I would say the middle one is probably, I mean, a cat using a computer as a pillow to nap. That's pretty lazy. So I have one image that clearly represents the idea of my lazy cat, combined with me saying and telling you just straight out, I have a lazy cat. Is there anything else I could do to this to improve this slide? Fill in the space, right? So I have this image in the middle of this white void. So blow it up. Boom. Now, if I were to show you this slide and say, I have a lazy cat, does that effectively convey that idea? In the most simple, direct way? And that's all you need. That is all you need. Now, this is one of the reasons why when you are choosing images, you want to look for high resolution images, okay? Because when you enlarge them like that on a slide, they'll still look pretty clear and crisp image wise. When you use lower resolution images, when you enlarge those, that's when you start to get the pixelization and distortion. You start to see the individual pixels and you get that stair step effect around the edges of images in the picture and stuff like that. You want your images to be clear and clean and crisp so the audience can clearly see what it is that you're showing them. Um, so yeah, high resolution images are what you want to look for. Now, on I think it was Sunday or yesterday, possibly, I sent out an announcement that has some media resources, some websites that offer free, royalty-free, high-resolution images that you can utilize for your presentations if you want. But yeah, so this is all you need to communicate one idea, one image that clearly represents or reflects the idea that you're talking about, and then what you're saying in your speech should be the main thing, okay? Because remember, your speech is your presentation. Your visuals are just there to support, to add a little extra oomph to your speech, to give a little bit of visual engagement for what you're talking about. Your audience should be paying attention to what you're saying more so than they should be paying attention to what they're seeing, okay? So I want you to remember this rule of thumb. One image per idea, one idea per slide. This is how you simplify your visuals, okay? And I do not ever, when you're creating a slide presentation, I do not ever want you to worry about how many slides you have. You use as many slides as you need. to effectively communicate your message. Okay? Because when you're doing it effectively, the audience isn't going to care how many slides you have because they're not going to notice how many slides you have because they're engaged in your presentation. They're not worried about it. In fact, I'm going to ask you guys right now, what slide number do you think I'm on right now in this presentation? How many slides do you think I've gone through so far? 60, 45, 25, 50, 20. This is very interesting. Anyone else? We got 90. Shooting high. Let's see. I am on slide number 71. There's 71 slides. Yeah. So when your audience is engaged, they don't care how many slides you have. So you use as many as you need to do it effectively, all right? But one image per idea, one idea per slide, all right? Because that keeps the audience focused on one thing at a time, okay? It's controlling the audience's attention on what you want. Now, and I was just about to bring up this point. Unless you're trying to show a direct comparison of things, or like a before and after, or a juxtaposition of some kind to make a point, then yeah, you can use multiple images for that. But you need to be making one point with multiple images, not multiple images that all communicate the same idea, like the cat thing that we just did, but effectively using multiple images that combined are proving one point that you're making, if that makes sense. Okay. So, as far as your presentations go, for example, if you're going to introduce yourself, and you're just like, "Hi, my name's Andrew, and I live in Orlando, Florida," and you want to use an image that represents Orlando or Florida or whatever, you just need one image. I don't need a road sign that says "Welcome to Orlando" and Mickey Mouse ears and palm trees and Lake Eola and all these other things. I don't need 5 images to show me that you're from Orlando. Just show me one image that represents Orlando. And you telling me that you're from Orlando, good, I got it. You locked it in. You're from Orlando. You've effectively communicated that idea super simply. Move on. I don't need a bunch of things. So one image per idea, one idea per slide simplifies your visuals, helps you control the audience's attention, and stops you from overcrowding your slides and overwhelming your audience with too many things at once. So that's the visual stuff for tonight. Now you are also recording your voices, your beautiful, lovely voices. We're going to hear your narration, hear you guiding us through your speech. So we're talking a little bit about vocal delivery. So like I said before, you should always rehearse your speech out loud multiple times. Record yourself, time yourself, so you can listen back and hear what you sound like. Because a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people don't like the sound of their own voice. And that's because the voice that everyone else hears is not the same voice that you hear in your head. And that has to do with the bones in your face and how sound travels through bones into your ears, as well as through the air around your head back into your ears. There's a whole, like, what we hear in our own head when we're talking is not what everyone else hears. when we were talking, and it's such a weird thing. But that's why when you listen back to yourself, like your voice recorded somewhere, why like it doesn't sound like you like, oh, that's what I sound like. It's weird, but what you're hearing recorded, that is actually what you sound like. That's what everyone else around you hears. It's something that you gotta get used to, really. But vocal delivery is important, okay? Because like I said, your speech is your presentation. That's where all the information is. That's where your structure, it's your speech. That's what the audience should be keying in on the whole time and listening to. Like I said, your visuals are just a support mechanism for your speech, but your speech is the presentation, really. So last week, did you watch for the discussion board activity last week? Did you watch a couple videos that were on the activity page? And one of them was the Julian Treasures, how to speak so that people will want to listen, right? Where it talks about various aspects of your vocal toolbox, the ideas of hail, honesty, authenticity, all that stuff. And then we had the vocal toolbox video that goes a little bit more into the different aspects of your vocal toolbox, such as pace and prosody and timbre and volume and those things. And so we want you to practice utilizing those things. Be more aware of how you sound and how you're utilizing each of those tools that you have at your disposal. And how you speak so that you sound interesting, so you sound engaging, so the audience wants to listen to you. Now, one of the most important things you can do before you record your speech and before you present live, if ever you present live or whatever, is articulation exercises. Because if you're not speaking clearly enough, then it can be difficult sometimes for the audience to understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. And that's not good. That's not going to help you out at all. So, articulation exercises are important because, and I'm not joking, every professional does that. As ridiculous as they may be, as silly as it may feel to do them, they help you an enormous amount to be able to speak clearly. Anyone who speaks live for a living, whether it's on television or whether they're speakers who speak to audiences, game show hosts, news anchors, whoever it is, I guarantee you all of them, before cameras turn on or before they walk out on stage, they do little articulation exercises to warm up their voice and to sort of loosen their mouth and tongue a little bit so that they're able to speak clearly. And it does actually work. Also, as another little pro tip, something else that helps you speak more clearly before you record yourself, brush your teeth. It sounds weird, but it actually does help you speak more clearly. So I'm going to share with you some tongue twisters that are designed to help with various types of sounds. So there are certain consonant combinations that, if you're not articulating them clearly enough, can be confused for the other. So K and G, for example. K makes it sound K, G makes it sound G. You could try it yourself. K, G. And as you make those sounds, pay attention to the way that your mouth is forming those sounds. So when you say K and G, the back of your tongue is probably hitting the back of your mouth, back of the top of your mouth. So the way in which your mouth is forming those sounds, those two separate sounds, are almost identical, but they produce two different sounds. But if you're not articulating them clearly enough, a K could be confused for a G or vice versa. Same thing with T and D. T and duh. If you try it yourself, which I hope you all are, because otherwise this is no fun. T, duh. Tip of your tongue is toward the front of the back of your teeth, right? Almost the exact same way of producing those two sounds, but two separate different sounds. Same thing with P and B. P and B. So, a way to help you clearly articulate these consonants is to say them back to back. And now with all of these, and with every tongue twister, the only way that they work, that they help you effectively, is to start off slow and then gradually speed up how fast you do them. Right? So ka ka ka, ga ga ga, ta ta ta, da da da, pa pa pa, ba ba ba. And then from there, you can speed up how fast you say it. And with all of these, as long as you can say all of these at a conversational pace, a conversational speed, we're not going like super fast, but speaking at the rate at which you normally talk when you're having a conversation with somebody, then you're pretty much good to go. Yeah, Chris said something he did inquire. Yeah, inquire. Anybody who ever did any sort of theater, drama stuff, like doing vocal warm-ups and doing these things is important because it helps you to enunciate. It helps you to speak or sing clearly. So the next one is for those kind of wah kind of words. So Wan Wan was a racehorse. Tutu was 1-2. When Wan Wan won one race, 2-2 won 1-2. Try it out yourself, please. And then once you can slowly say it, each word enunciating as clearly and articulately as possible, then you slowly speed up until you can speak it at a conversational pace. Wan Wan was a racehorse. 2-2 was 1-2. When Wan Wan won one race, 2-2 won 1-2. So now we're going to kick it up a notch. This is for all those st words that you need to articulate clearly. Those ST and DST words, right? So this is another one. You want to take it one word at a time, articulating it as clearly as you can. Amidst the mist and coldest frost, with barest wrists and stoutest boasts, he thrusts his fists against the post and still insists he sees the ghosts. So this one specifically is one that's utilized for a lot of speech therapy, actually. People have stutters or lisps, and actually was featured for any Stephen King fans, in the book and subsequently the movies of It. There was a character who stuttered in it, and he used this as one of his exercises. All right, now we're going to kick it up a notch again. So this last one I'm going to show you looks simple at the face of it, and I want all of you to try it. It's very short. I want to see something. All right, here we go. Which wristwatch is the Swiss wristwatch? Which wristwatch is the Irish wristwatch? Now you try. Carter nailed it. I was just going to say, how many of you flubbed it up on the jump from Irish to wristwatch? And it came out Rishwash, Irish Rishwash. Like I said, it looks easy. And that's what I meant earlier by, like, sometimes you write something and it sounds fine in your head, but it's not until you say it out loud that for some reason it's that combination of words, like, just does not work together. the importance of saying your speech out loud so you can find those little trouble areas and rewrite them if you need to. But yeah, so again, if you say it slowly enough, one word at a time, it's fine. And then slowly speed it up until you can say it at conversational speech. Which wristwatch is the Swiss wristwatch? Which wristwatch is the Irish wristwatch? So again, as ridiculous as it may feel doing these, as silly as it may seem, they do actually help you to be able to speak more clearly and articulately when you need to, okay? Because again, if we can't understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, then your speech is kind of going to fall on its face a little bit. Because if we can't understand you, then we're not understanding the point that you're making or whatever information you're trying to present, and your presentation isn't going to succeed as well as it could have if you were clear and articulate in what you're talking about. Now, there are a billion of these out there. You can just do a general Google search for tongue twisters and you'll find thousands of these. But these are some of my favorite, and ones that I have found to be most effective for myself using. All right. A little bit over time. I meant to only go to 9 o'clock. I'm a little bit over. But does anybody have any questions about any of the contents, any of the assignments or activities, anything that we talked about this evening before we wrap it up to a close? Or are you good to go for now? Good to go, good to go. Hold on. GS, are we able to use our own content for references? Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by references? Can I use a movie I made in iMovie? As far as do you mean that as far as like examples of work that you've done? Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So if you're like in the middle of your present in the middle portion of your structure talking about, education and experience and skills and things like that, that would be a good place to put that as like an example of work that you've created that showcases your credibility, your qualification kind of thing. Same thing for anybody who does like visual design stuff or art stuff. Like the middle is where you would show like examples of your work, because that's things that are specifically related to how you're qualified. But yeah, you can absolutely utilize examples of your own work that you have. Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. Okay. Okay, it's not the moment when you have this posted to rewatch later. Yes. So what I'm going to do is I've been recording it. I have to export it out of GoTo, and then I'm going to post it on YouTube, and then I'll post this session on the 3.1 activity page in the same way that I've done for the last 2 weeks on the 1.1 and 2.1 activity pages. So if you need to go back and rewatch something, you can do that, and I'll have that posted up in a little bit. Usually takes a little bit of time to export, but it'll be up by tomorrow morning at the very, very latest. Okay, so Carter asks, what's the difference between a narrative video and a presentation slide? So do you just mean like between the two formats, a presentation, like a slide presentation and a video presentation? Okay, so slide presentation, I mean specifically you're utilizing a slide presentation program like PowerPoint or Keynote where you're creating slides and adding images and then adding either an audio file of your narration or utilizing a presentation recording feature of that program, whatever it might be. What I mean by video presentation is if you are actually going to use like a camera to record yourself, like talking on screen at the camera, or recording, B-roll footage of stuff and actually editing together a movie version of your presentation where we're hearing you talk through your speech, but we're seeing more like video content rather than imagery, like still image content like you would have usually with a slide presentation. Does that make sense? Okay. It's like I think in the announcement that I sent out with the media resources, I included a link to a video presentation that I made during one of my master's programs. It's sort of a combination of video, me talking to the camera on screen, and combined with images and music and stuff like that. That's more so a video presentation rather than a slide presentation with audio. As you were speaking the speech future tense. Yes, so in your speech, you are imagining that you have recently graduated from your degree program, that you are not a current student, but a recent graduate, and you are speaking to the company that you would like to work for. So Carter asked, is one video based and one is image based? Uh, Essentially, yes. So video presentation would be more uh, video in the sense that we're again sort of a little bit like the example that I sent in that announcement of one of the video presentations that I created during one of my master's program, where it's video of us seeing you or us seeing you on video, like talking to the camera or talking to your audience on camera, or showing other like video clips as part of like a B-roll or showing examples of things like that, as opposed to a slide presentation with recorded audio narration, which tends to have more so like still images or bullet points and text more so than video content. I'll make sure I'm not missing anybody. Okay, so Christopher also asked if we. Okay, so if you yes, so as far as referencing or citing media and things like that, yeah. So if you use your own work, include that in your citations. Like, let us know that this was actually your work. You created it, or you wrote it, or you designed it, or you drew it, or you whatever it might be. Even if if you're doing music stuff and you want to add in like music background with music that you created, like let us know that. Like, always give credit where credit is due, even if you're the one who's due that credit. Okay. I think I got everybody. Okay. Any other questions? Go wrap it up. Oh. On the point of music, I totally forgot. I totally forgot to mention this. So when it comes to video presentations, and actually you can do this with slide presentations also, adding audio, music. I highly recommend that you, if you can, incorporate background music of some kind that is uh, tonally appropriate to what you're talking about. But the reason is, in the same way that words are very powerful, images are very powerful, music is uniquely powerful in a way that images and words aren't. Because music is a universal thing, and again it hits our brain and our ears in a way that music or in a way that images and text and speech don't. And it can add a huge another level of pathos and emotional appeal to your presentation. And if you do it right, it can really enhance your entire presentation. However, if you're going to use background music, which again I totally recommend trying it out. However, use music that does not contain lyrical content, so that it's just instrumental. And I don't mean orchestral by instrumental. I just mean it's just the music and there's nobody singing in it, because it's very difficult to, as an audience member, to try to listen to you talking in your speech and also trying to not listen to somebody singing lyrics in a song that we're also hearing. Okay, we can't, when there's both, when there's somebody singing and somebody talking, it's very, very distracting and very difficult to hear both at the same time, because you're going to pick one or the other. You're either going to try to listen to somebody talking to you talking through your speech, which you want, or the audience is going to choose to listen to whoever's singing and tune you out. So you don't want to give the audience that option to not listen to you, because the whole point of your presentation is that they listen to you, right? So make sure your background music doesn't have any lyrical content, so that you're not distracting the audience with somebody else talking while you're also talking. And make sure that the volume doesn't overpower your voice, or that it's not competing with the volume of your speech, your narration. Okay. But other than that, I totally recommend playing around, experimenting with background music. Even different music for different sections of your structure, because having a music change when you start talking about something else, like if you have certain music playing in your beginning portion where you're talking about your why and your inspirations and things like that, and then transitioning to a different music that while you talk about your into your middle where you're talking about your qualifications and your your education and credibility and all that stuff, and then transferring or transitioning again to a third piece of music for your end portion where you're talking about where your goals and what you want to do and things like that. It gives an auditory cue to the audience that the topic is changing a little bit, or that you're moving on to the next thing. Music, you can use music in a lot of different ways that can help the flow of your presentation, but also help the sort of emotional impact of it as well. So I highly recommend checking out or playing around with background music a little bit. And there's also a website that I think I included this in the media resources announcement that I sent out. But we have through the Full Sail Library page on the Connect site. One of the media databases is called Westar Music, and it is a site that has a ton of uh, music for all types of moods and feelings and stuff, but it's totally free for you to use and download as much of it as you want. That's again part of your tuition. Same way that you have full free access to lynda.com, you have full access to Westar Music. So definitely check that out. There's a lot of awesome, great musical content, music options and content that's royalty free for you to use. So use the crap out of that while you can. Okay, that's my bit on music. I should have mentioned that earlier when I was talking about video presentations. But whether you're doing a video presentation or a slide presentation, you can include music. If you can add audio narration to a slide presentation, you can probably also add music to it as well. And I highly recommend doing that. All right, that's all I got. So, everybody good to go? Any final questions? I'll take the silence as a no. All right. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. I'm glad you're able to join me this week. I hope you're able to join me next week as well, next Tuesday. I'm super excited to see your first drafts. Be on the lookout for my feedback on your presentation plans. And yeah, I hope you guys have a good week. And I'll see you next week. Have a good night.